Well, great. Well, we'll dive right in here. It's wonderful to be with you. It's actually been quite a while since I've been out. I think Dorothy invited me many, many years ago, but I'm not sure I've been back since. And so this is really, really important for me to share a little bit of this. Everything I'm going to show tonight was done in preparation for a presentation to Mayor Stewart on May 10th. We had a date previous to that, which was canceled. And then on May 10th, unfortunately, we only were able to present to a couple of his staff. Although, and I was able to share that presentation with staff. So they have a part of this, but I've gone a little deeper. I've expanded this. Everything you see is already in the public domain. A lot of that is due to the FOI work of Steve, I just have to say, but as well other reports and policies that are out there. And so what I'm going to do is sort of a bit of chronological narrative here that reminds us, going back a bit, to just understand the kind of origins of thinking for this site and where I'm seeing some particular public process disconnects. So I'll just see here. Is this going to advance for me? Okay. So my primary reason for being here is the accountability and integrity of the public process. My observations, I will say, are apolitical, but they are wanting to highlight and emphasize this kind of disconnect. I'm not laying tonight at the foot of the developer or the architect. I respect both of them. I respect their work. They do good work. I believe that the development inquiry process did not honorably consider community aspiration and has therefore failed all stakeholders, especially elected officials, presumably tomorrow if they consider referral. But I'm going to conclude because I do believe there is a win-win still possible, but it's going to take huge political will, particularly with this developer and architect, to affect the kind of changes. When I still haven't met the mayor, and so I wanted to at least, as Dorothy, thank you very much again, indicated, I ran something called the City of Vancouver's Urban Design Studio for 10 of my 20-year tenure there. So 2004 to 2014, I actually left the city in 2014 to go out to UBC and teach urban design for the last 8 years or so. But I found my little studio entrepreneurial cohort involved in a lot of both community policy work, as you see some examples here, but more particularly, I had a particular role, and this was mainly Larry Beasley assigning me this role, to be the lead urban design negotiator with the development proponents on an array of really big and sort of complex projects. Some of which I know, including the Rise Alliance, the Independents, are still painful for a lot of folks. Within the political context of the day, I can share more about that. But for example, projects like Woodward's was one of my projects, working with West Bank, Enriquez, Olympic Village. As I say, the Rise Alliance project in Mount Pleasant, upper right. Also with this same architect, Perkins and Will, in the lower left is the PCI Marine Gateway project. The early days of thinking about the Vancouver House site before the land was sole source to West Bank. And then further to the right there, you have 70th and Granville, which I inherited after a previous development planner left. And then the early days of Oak Ridge to weigh in a bit on what obviously was a pretty ambitious undertaking. So the reason I'm showing this and why I wanted to show the mayor this is that during my time at City, as a pretty aggressive development planner with density, but always in the interest of serving and strengthening community. I'm hardwired as a community person first. Some of you probably know that. Before joining City Hall, I was an advocate and chair of the Arbutus Lands process, the Arbutus Walk, Carling O'Keefe area, along with my pal Sean McEwen. And we effectively drew towers off the table by proactively picking up our pens and pencils to demonstrate a better way. And at that time, the city was receptive and shifted the project away from point tower form to the kind of mid-rise idea that you see there now. So we're here now today. We've got this to contend with. And so I want to go through a little bit of chronology so that we try to understand how we got here. So site investigation history by a COV staff. So this reaches back to 1999, at a time when we were starting to do important station area planning. These are drawings that I made along with Ray Spaxman, Norm Hodson, and Frank Ducote for a community workshop. And this is important. That was previous to the Grandview Woodlands plan, where we began to understand, given the Millennium Line, sort of potential, how we begin to think about heights and public realm and kind of pedestrian systems in and around what would be an expanded station. And although it's not entirely clear here, this early work, again, 23 years ago now, also informed some additional work that would come later in 2006 with, coincidentally, the same architect, Perkins and Will. Peter Busby's name was on the letterhead at that point. But this is the city and TransLink hiring Perkins and Will and others to look at the Safeway site specifically, given the potential for Expo Line station house improvements, particularly at that end, and as we see now with the expanded passerelle over Broadway. And at that time, maybe not so coincidentally, they were proposing 3 towers in 2006. And I was there on behalf of the planning department. We were the client and we were actually paying for part of the study. And I said, no, we did not support 3 towers on this site. And this is, coincidentally, very similar to what we're seeing today now. But we said no, and we asked the consultants to go back and redraw the scheme for the final report that would be taken to council with 2 towers. And so as far back as 2006, this has always been a 2-tower site in my mind. It's never been a 3-tower site. And this particular architect, although, personnel comes and goes within architectural practices, but this was our not just our advice, but our requirement to accept the consultant's report. And so, but in addition, and also with respect to the work in 1999, there was an interest to explore where would the kind of outdoor heart of the community be. And from 1999, and then as further sort of early days of investigation here, we began to understand that, at least from what we heard from the community at the time, that the northeast corner of 10th and Commercial, combined with the kind of south station house improvements that we begin to see here, along with some, kind of additional active frontage on the north side of what could be an active urban plaza that could be the heart of this part of the drive, away from the ambient noise of both SkyTrain and the traffic. 10th being a much quieter kind of street. So that was an important carry forward, if you will, from both the early days and then this work in 2006. I'm not advancing here. Bear with me. Okay, so we actually continue to work on this. This is heading towards what I want to say is an early, one of the first disconnects. But we were, as a studio, continuing to look at a 2-tower scheme from the TransLink City of Vancouver report, certainly pre-Citizens Assembly, but definitely pre Grandview Woodlands plan, noting that we had a lot of, I'll say, pressure and interest to land some taller form to help pay for an upgrade or a shift in the Safeway footprint. We began to do work directly with Safeway. This was before Sobeys acquired them. We understood the development economics of a phased shift of a larger Safeway store if it were to move west to east towards the kind of tapered part of the site. We We were in direct discussion with Safeway in Calgary, as well as Safeway marketing people in California. So our little urban design studio, working with other planning staff, we were gaining a deep understanding of the development economics associated with Safeway's interests, with the idea that they would get essentially a refreshed store here that had a pretty decent payback in terms of capital investment. And so this was thinking about a bit of what we'll call a fee simple site, so that the easterly have to be subdivided off and done early to help then pay for the Safeway transformation. We began to understand, as this discussion advanced directly with Safeway's architects, that Safeway was actually prepared to shut down their store for the construction period. So say 2 to 3 years for a big complex project like this. And in fact, they were beginning to look at options for offices stacked above a larger Safeway floor plate adjacent to the improved Expo Line station house. So clipped on, if you will, along that easterly edge of the station, with the idea that from the platform level, there would be a direct linkage into either the offices above or even an elevated Safeway floor at the platform level, which would then allow parking below to be essentially at grade and then disguised by little commercial retail units around the edges. So you didn't notice it. And why that was important is because it got the project out of the underground parking, the additional costs of excavation and all that concrete. And this was back again in 2013, when we weren't even thinking about embodied carbon and trying to get out of concrete. But even then, the idea was that we didn't necessarily need to do a deep excavation to make a project like I'm beginning to show here pencil out. Well, also in 2013, Sobeys acquired Safeway. And so a lot of this discussion shut down for the time being, and I left the city in 2014, so soon thereafter. But we had gotten fairly far with our thinking around tower form. So this leads me to public process disconnect, breach of trust number 1. So this is a drawing, again, in 2013, one of the drawings my studio would have made before I left, certainly, that I call it the 22 gun salute to Grandview Woodlands. And it's essentially the director of planning telling us, giving us instructions to draw as many towers as we could. And there are 22 of them here. And you can see, of course, that early thinking starting to be reflected here, but 20 additional towers. And of course, this one never made it to the Grandview Woodlands process or into the public domain at the time. This is only here now because of the FOI. What I understand happened, and I wasn't in the room, so I'll be careful not to overly speculate, was that this drawing was taken to the senior leadership, including either councilors and or mayor, by director of planning and a city manager. And I think they were aghast at, from what we heard, at this idea of 22 towers. So the urban design instruction was cut it in half. And so again, under protest, because we didn't necessarily believe in towers other than immediately adjacent to the station, we drew what we were asked to draw. But as you begin to see here, cutting down to 11 towers, and as with the 2 on the Safeway site, heights of 34 and 36 stories, with the 6-story kind of office block over what could be an expanded Safeway floor plate. So that, of course, went out. Here's what it looked like at the time. Tall, slim buildings, still 2 towers, a 3rd tower on the adjacent sort of apex site further to the east along the cut. But as you see here, kind of, and this is important for transportation-oriented development optimization, is to get the office uses using the transit with immediate adjacent proximity. But this is what we developed, and then the process went out, open house June 2013. started to show this stuff, and the process began to implode. And so here is, as I recall, and this is where the chronology gets a little fuzzy, but I believe the draft concept plan, as you see on the left there, had cut the, even as early as 2013, began to cut the heights down to 28 and 22 stories. Again, only two towers with 11 stories along Commercial immediately west, as you see there. So 2013, you have 22 and 28. And what does 22 and 28 mean? Well, let me come back to that. So the Grandview Woodlands Citizens Assembly released their report in 2015. 2 years ago, as you see, residents balked at the prospect of 36 stories, several sites for high-rise 22 and 28. We began to appreciate, and as I was, I think, leaving around 2014, I think we were hearing of the lower heights that were being preferred by the Citizens Assembly, but we were never given permission to draw those, or more importantly, to test them, to see if we could land the kind of density that we might need to affect the Safeway site in its refresh or transition, but as well do all the other things that bigger site needed to do in terms of community amenity contributions, perhaps some office uses for transportation-oriented development. And so we were as urban designers aware of this work, but we continued on with the two towers at the instruction of our senior leaders. And so it began to become a little more detailed in 2013 to 2016. And as you begin to see here, the idea that there could be a community plaza on the corner, and even expanded plaza when taking into account part of 10th Avenue. But showing towers at, I'll say, and this may sound painful still, but at only 24 and 28, given the kind of political pressure being put on staff to keep these heights up. We were beginning to show related towers of 18 and 22 on the south side of 10th, or sort of an array, but no other towers, So 2 on this site, 22 story on the apex site, and then 18 and 22. So this kind of bundling of 5 towers in fairly compact proximity to the station was what we thought was, more than defensible, and the certain political preference of where we were going. Here's just a sense of that, of course, with the idea that Safeway might be on the easterly half of the site, which could be built with towers above, and then moving in and booting up the store overnight, and then beginning to demolish the existing store for the offices above. That was where I think Sobeys was starting to go, since we had been working more directly with Safeway. Well, something that's really important that I want to emphasize tonight is, as all of this is happening, this is so key for council to understand, is that the proposed heights for the 2 towers at that time of 24 and 28 were always intended to include the Safeway volume only. So in the policy, and I can't tell you how the policy got worded in the way that it did for the approved Grandview Woodlands plan, but this idea that you could have an unlimited height on the plinth or the podium is not on. That was not at all what we were intending. And you go back to this image and you can see at most a 2 image. And so those heights include that podium. So 24 and 28 were to include, I'll say, a 3-story maximum volume for the Safeway operation. And that, of course, has been exploited now in the current development application. We continued, and staff continued to work on the plaza idea, beginning to understand with the prospect of a building immediately north of the plaza, with the idea that more so than on what would be a private site, that this could be a site that could be acquired by the city through community amenity contributions to pay for the acquisition, maybe ship the development rights to the adjacent property, but wanting to actually have a public asset in the public domain owned by the public for the residents of Grandview Woodland at the time. So the plan in 2016 came out, and this was the concept of the day. I, of course, had left a couple years prior, but this drawing was done by very, very capable urban design staff. I know who authored this drawing. And as you can see, it's a 2-tower scheme. It's similar in its kind of development intensity, immediately adjacent to the east side of the Expo line expanded upper platform. A little more density along 10th and a little more density along the cut, but it's not terribly dissimilar to that. So the idea is that we were advancing in terms of urban design, and I cannot tell you how much of this made its way into the public domain before the Grandview Woodland Plan was ultimately approved. But this was the form of development that was in play, and presumably by staff as the final polish was being put on the Grandview Woodland Plan for council approval. I am speculating a bit here, but I'm pretty convinced that there wasn't any urban design analysis to generate or understand the FSR that this scheme, but I am very confident it's well under the 5.7 in the plan. My guess is that it's closer to 4 to 4.5, but that's a guess because I haven't actually, it's easy enough to do, and you know, Stephen or others could figure this out pretty quickly. But this is where I think, you know, there was a disconnect, because this drawing was in the draft, and then, as I think some of you know, it was then dropped from the final publishing of the plan. And again, this drawing being fairly representative of, you know, going back to 2006, not quite as far back as 1999, but, you know, almost 8 to 10 years of work on this site to understand where, given the political leanings and the pressure that was felt by staff of the day, where there was a marginally, you know, I'll say less than palatable. I'm not going to use the word sweet spot, because that would be not honorable to everyone here. But staff was feeling that we needed to do towers, but 2 thin towers, and really tamp down on the heights, and a scheme that, and we didn't really care about what the density yield was. What we cared about was breaking the site down into multiple pieces, multiple more distinct forms, to reduce the apparent cumulative scale of what could be seen as a bigger homogeneous overscaled approach. So there's some fairly specific strategies with the drawing on the left that were left out. And this diagram is also, it flows from the perspective on the right. It was left in as one way to think about this site, but what I know was added at the very 11th hour, and I'm going to expect that there was very little to no public consultation about this, was what I'll call disconnect breach of trust number 2. And that's that, and I would love to be corrected on this, but I believe that the first iteration of development inquiry, as we see here, which some of you remember, was in play, and that the second diagram, which I'll show you in a moment, that, and the number, the peculiar, much too specific, I'll say arbitrary number of 5.7 FSR must have been derived from something, because there was, again, I'm not sure any work done for the city's urban design staff's work to understand the density, yet you go to the plan and it went forward to council with a very, very specific number. So I can only understand that that number was being given to development planning staff who take the development inquiries, and I should emphasize that more often than not, there's a real disconnect between the community planning policy folks and any kind of concurrent inquiries that might be advancing simultaneously. And so I think that that 5.7 number was loaded in there with perhaps even under protest. I don't know, by city staff. I don't want to speculate that, but I expect there was a lot of concern about what was probably a senior leadership decision, and I don't know who it was or could have been, but that the density that's reflected here got loaded in as a potential density under the Grandview Woodlands plan. It's not to say that this wasn't an interesting scheme, because I think it under the hand of the late Bing Tom, master architect, it with some even citizens assembly like emphasis. So doing this particular scheme as a series of 10 to 12 to 14 story buildings gathered around a central public open space that had a certain openness and permeability to it, and a much more engaging kind of connection with the platform, and a friendlier, I think, 10th Avenue adjacency, could have actually been a pretty interesting scheme as a vertical village. This is the plan for that scheme on the right, and this is the diagram that was added at the 11th hour. So, 5.7 FSR is suspicious to me. Adding that particular second site diagram after all of the work of staff over, again, since 2006, also suspicious. And why was the rendering removed? This rendering again, why was that actually removed? Because it did not look like that. Maybe, who knows? But it's just to say that this was a moment when something happened, and I do not know what happened. I expect not too many do. But the upshot of that is that you're stuck with a plan that allows for 5.7 FSR. And it's not this form of development, or even a kind of on a diet version of this form of development. Now we get to public process disconnect breach of trust number 3, because this is an entirely different form of development, obviously, that's being considered for referral. It's 3 towers, obviously, not 4 on the left of kind of a hierarchy of towers with smaller floor plates. The cumulative massing on the right is overwhelming when you compare it to the siding and the kind of openness in between on the left. And I've done a bit of a crude kind of graphic comparison of the two to scale. And yes, there's some height on the left, and that could have been tamed with some design development conditions to reduce that height, again heading closer to citizens assembly interests. But you can see that the building that's now in play at 5.7 FSR, it's a wall. It's a huge cumulative massive wall that would not have been anticipated when the Grandview Woodlands plan was consummated. So that 5.7, the point is that it can take different forms, and we have to always be careful about specifically assigning numbers to particular form of developments, because the market never necessarily follows through on those. So now it's this project, obviously. Now it's 3 towers, and the 24 to 29 stories sit atop a much higher retail plinth, which was, again, never the intent. So the question really of the day is it too late to revise? This has been done before of projects of this scale. So this is a Marine and Canby Marine Gateway that I inherited from a previous development planner, because this particular project that you see on screen did not get the support of the urban design panel. It was considered too massive, too blocky, overwhelming, out of scale, even in anticipation of other buildings that would come, of course, this being the first end. And so what we were able to do is work with very, very skilled project architect, also at Perkins and Will, to totally rework the massing of this into 2 thinner towers. My little thumbnail sketches on the right, and then the final project on the left, where The office component was reoriented. It was trimmed down. Even the podium, the plinth was broken up and articulated, but a really thin kind of clip-on of two very small floor plate towers was acceptable and actually ultimately highly profitable to the developer, who's PCI, who I also have a lot of time for. So this project was Ryan Bragg being the architect at Perkins and Will, I wanted to mention. So it went from a massive beast, same architect as the site before you, to something through design iteration and just a few weeks of really hard roll up your sleeves work. We were able to reshape the project, not really lose much density, and in fact, economically improve the bottom line because of more units in the sky with three, with a breathing room between the towers and views around of the Fraser River and a distant, even Olympic Peninsula setting. Here's another one. So I know, again, this is painful, but this project started, as per the image on the left, as a much, much bigger project. It started at the inquiry stage at 35 stories and 8.5 FSR. And it got whittled down to 25 with the urban design panel actually supporting. And again, given the political sort of pressures of the day, I told the proponents that we could stay unless it was under 20. So I know it's 21 now, but essentially they brought the height down, as you see in the gray or the blue there in the lower diagram. So the point being that staff can negotiate hard on behalf of the community and push these things before they have to hit the floor of council. I was chastised by one councilor at the public hearing for this project for it not being big enough, but I just could not accept the fact that this needed to be a taller tower with the kind of big floor plates that we see there now with the Independent by Rise Alliance. And so this got redesigned twice before it advanced within the approvals process. So it's a much different project than what could have been. And I expect if this was being done in today's climate, it would have been the bigger version. So here we are. What should we do? How do we kind of, even though this may not be acceptable to all on the left, it is certainly a more reasonable outcome than what we see on the right. And so the kind of changes that we're talking about are too substantive, I think, to simply write as, design development conditions to adjust at the development permit stage. I really do think, and it may be too late for this, that this project needs to be sent back before referral to revise. And so here are some quick suggestions on what could be done to make this project more palatable. So the first one, redistribute massing to improve project scale, including eliminating the third tower and lowering the podium to 2 and 3 stories as intended. Using the community amenity contributions, acquire the 10th and commercial corner for public space, as we see here, or another worthy candidate. But the idea that this project can't generate CACs is beyond me. Refocus office uses to more adjacent relationship to the expo line, as we see here, including access from the platform level. Reduce the size of the Safeway footprint. Develop a public realm plan for 10th Avenue and blocks further south to ensure local greenway connectivity as part of the Grandview Woodland Plan intent, and encourage private sites on 10th Avenue to advance their own respective rezonings, this one here or this one here, so that this one particular development doesn't soak up all the market density on one site. I think there's something to be said about democratizing participation with other privately held sites that could be tower sites under the plan. So these are painful for the developer and the architect for sure, but it's been done before, and all it takes is political will. So let me advance here. I've got just a couple more slides. Come on, come on. Not sure why this, okay, here we go. So just a few more final observations and I'll close. So first, an observation and some questions with respect to CAC. So the performa inputs are complex for this project. And I'm not going to get into the residential tenure versus land lift conversation. That's beyond my depth of understanding at this point, given today's economics. But I am interested, and I want to note that Safeway, before acquisition by Sobeys, was prepared to forego revenue during construction, towards a new, bigger, modern capital asset. And we knew that the capital investment payback was relatively short term. All right, get this out of the way. So it raises a couple of questions. Should foregone Safeway revenue over multiple years during construction, that presumably, and I'm happy to be corrected about this, is being considered when assessing performa viability at 5.7 FSR with tall tower heights, directly impact the decision to entirely forego CACs. If real estate services is saying they're not compensating for that foregone revenue, then great. But I think someone needs to ask that question. And two, if it is, should a new and privately held Safeway facility therefore be considered a legitimate public benefit, with foregone CACs attributed to its development? Or alternatively, should the owner's risk to develop and refresh the capital asset be simply reflected in the land deal? In other words, West Bank goes back, renegotiates the land, including the obligation for full CAC contribution. That happens all the time. And I whenever councilors reach out to me, I say, you know, land costs are like stocks. They go up and they go down. So we just have forgotten how to negotiate hard on behalf of the community and the greater good. The inability to contribute potential foregone CAC dollars to pay for that open space or daycares or libraries or other needed amenities, because lost revenue during construction is acknowledged as a performa hit, is, as I say, worth questioning. I'm happy to be corrected. An observation on the role of community plans. Council approved community plans should identify strategic sites. And this one did, fair enough. It's obvious, obviously, with this site, and their specific contributory programmatic roles in service to the local community and greater good. These particular roles should be clearly articulated in the community plan so that related development approval obligations towards larger community plan implementation expectations are well understood to enable land negotiations to properly reflect. That's a very simple idea. Such clarity also ensures a shared understanding of when a proposal overreaches or underreaches, as forma development and related economic testing is necessary to set massing and scale limits. And all sites have limits, including political ones. So who knows if this site's going to be seen as so overreaching that there's sufficient political courage to send it back. Such process rigor does not appear to have happened in this case. Therefore, the proposal, in my view, overreaches. I believe the potential referral of this proposal before council, I understand tomorrow, suffers in part from the city believing that the site must be all things to all people, including ensuring viability of a food market, optimizing TOD best practices through proximic and intensified office uses, and the challenges of phasing on a peculiar shaped lot, with all in addition to affordability pursuits and CAC obligations. So a lot of expectation there. And are these three towers the pure economic expression, assuming for the moment that the city is being hard-nosed in their negotiations? It's hard to know. Projects such as this one can run the risk of imploding under its own approval process weight when subsequent policies layer on additional economic expectations over time. So perhaps some of the market rental, MERP, and other tenure which would not have been part of the Grandview Woodland Plan expectation is causing some of the pain here. All sites and the related pursuit of bigness have, or I'll say must have, inherent limits. finances, which I would describe as printing money as zoning currency, must always defer to form and fit. This is how we discipline land costs, and City Hall has forgotten this very important idea. So finally, disconnect, breach of trust, number 4, and potential sad irony. So this is the last slide. So here we are with the 22-gun salute, whittled down to 11 towers of 36 and 34 on the left, lower left. And now the proposal that's before council with heights similar to the same image on the right, reflecting the 34 and 36 story heights. So we're not in 2013, but it sure feels like 2013 before the Grandview Woodlands process imploded in the advent of the Citizens Assembly, because the proposed heights are more or less the same as when the public process imploded in the first time and vision was summarily dismissed. And so worth reminding council that this proposal has brought us back to the brink of with the same heights as when the public process imploded the first time. So I hope that's helpful to everyone. I know that was a lot to take in, but from my, I'll say fuzzy memory about this, to the best of my ability and my lived experience for the time I was at the hall, that's how I remember it going down. And, you know, after 2014, it's hard for me to really know much more behind closed doors, but there's enough there in the kind of series of disconnects to really sort of question council to do some more forensics on how we got here pre-Citizens Assembly. So gee, I've spoken for 50 minutes. My apologies on that, but I can stick around for a few more minutes. Craig, over to you.
No apology necessary. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Scott. Really appreciate that.